The AWL season is complete, and we have our champions this season in the Widows. It took till the 8th inning when 29-year-old rookie Tatiana May hit a ball into center, scoring Fatima de la Cruz from second with a RBI double that broke the scoreless tie. From there, Barbara Dixon added on, bringing in May from second to extend the lead to 2-0. Then, Jane Sappho shut the door in the 9th, and the Widows end this season as AWL champions as the 4 seed, beating the 2 seed Nightmare in the best of 7 series 4-2. With the off-season wrapped up, it's time to give a recap of all the moving and shaking around the AWL, and it was a wild one. First up, players who decided to hang up the cleats and ride off into the sunset. Closing pitchers Ibis Katan of the Battlehawks and Ron Suji of the Sirens have retired. Katan was 39, while Suji was 42. The only other retirement this season was the right fielder, first baseman, and outfielder for the Nightmare, DJ Dawkins, and he walks away from the game at 36. We saw Dawkins have some good games against the Widows in the AWL Championship Series, so I can imagine they're going to miss his leadership in the locker room. In the AWL, all players can decide to opt out of their contract at any point after the season is over, so this makes the off-season really interesting because you never know who's going to want to test free agency. Starting with the Widows free agents, the biggest shock is Crush Gonzalez. The superstar left fielder at 22 years old hit the open market, as well as 28-year-old shortstop LILITH Nightingale, 23-year-old catcher Kanye Jin, 26-year-old first baseman Barbara Dixon, 33-year-old starting pitcher and relief pitcher Donisha Moss, and 39-year-old relief pitcher Fawn Ribeye. All these contracts off the books opened up a grand total of $113,900,000 in cap space for the champions. On to some of the other hot free agents around the league this year. We have 19-year-old starting pitcher of the mighty Gabriela Gonzalez, younger sister of Crush Gonzalez, 23-year-old third baseman Kwl Lightning of the Nightmare. She tests free agency, potentially going to leave her brother Chip. 22-year-old Chisei Muto, the catcher of the Sirens. 28-year-old relief pitcher Motormouth Moschita from the Blurs. 24-year-old right fielder Emi Shiba, also from the Sirens, and 19-year-old right fielder Roman Claymore from the Monarchs. He was not happy with his playing time, and he told me that he wanted to go somewhere where he can show what he can do. Claymore only played in a total of 18 games for the Monarchs last season, 14 in the regular season and 4 in the playoffs. As a rising young player in the league, it'll be exciting to see where he lands. Let's move on to seeing where these free agents and many more, including new rookies, have ended up, shall we? We'll do signings and re-signings first, then any sign and release moves for each team. Up first, let's take a look at the Widows and see what moves they made to try and run it back for another championship. First up, Widows fans can breathe a sigh of relief as Crush Gonzalez re-signs to a huge $62 million deal, becoming the highest paid player in the league. Gonzalez said that she's overjoyed to return to the team and be with her girls, and she's excited to be a key part in helping the organization win back-to-back AWL titles. The Widows also re-signed LILITH Nightingale for $19.9 million. Donisha Moss returns on a $14.1 million deal, and we know how important she was for this team last season. Barbara Dixon comes back on a $2.8 million contract. They added the former backup catcher for the Tormenta, Aura Valentine, signing her to a $4 million contract. And finally, the Widows signed 19-year-old rookie left-handed relief pitcher Naomi Encarnacion for $6.4 million. When it comes to sign and release moves, the Widows made a couple of those as well. In a somewhat surprising move, they released 35-year-old right fielder Raven Chaos and signed 26-year-old Alexis Gamble to replace her. Chaos was making $20.6 million, and they signed Gamble to a $8.7 million deal, freeing up $11.9 million in the process. The team wraps up their offseason bringing in a new starting pitcher, 19-year-old lefty Roxy Riot, on a $4 million deal. She replaces 27-year-old Sally Slowpitch, who was making $2.2 million on the team. The move, I was told, was not an easy one, but in the end, the organization chose to improve the back end of the rotation and get someone they view with a lot of upside in Roxy Riot. We'll see if the move pays off for them. Let's move on to the BATTLEHAWKS, who finished last season 13-11, ended up being the 2 seed in the playoffs and advancing to the semifinals before being beaten by the Widows. What did they do to become better in the offseason? With Ibis Katan's retirement, they had a huge need at closer, so they went out and locked up former Mighty closer 23-year-old Daichi Bushida on a $9.1 million deal. Bushida last season only pitched in 3 games for the Mighty and had an ERA of 5.40. He gave up 2 runs in 3 1/3 innings pitched and ended up saving 1 game. Bushida said that he's more motivated after a short time with the Mighty and is looking to become a closer the league fears. They also signed former Widow relief pitcher 39-year-old Fawn Ribeye to a $9.5 million contract. They end up acquiring 35-year-old rookie Addison Lark as she joins the team for outfield depth. For their final signing, they bring in former Tiger first baseman 24-year-old Suwa Kang on a $3.2 million deal. The only sign and release move for the BATTLEHAWKS was bringing back 28-year-old Titus Bird to play second base. They let right fielder Jacob Fair go, who was making $22 million. Bird's contract is for $4.8 million, and this saves $17.2 million for the BATTLEHAWKS. The team with the need for speed in the Blurs finished 12-12 last season in the Monument and in a very light off-season, only making one move, signing 33-year-old starting pitcher and relief pitcher Grip Ambrose to a $4.1 million deal. Let's take a look at the Dragons and see how their off-season went. This past season they just missed the playoffs by a couple of games, finishing 11-13 in 5th place in the Valiant. The Dragons' moves were all of the sign and release variety, and their biggest move was signing the former Siren catcher 22-year-old Chisei Muto to a $20.8 million deal. Muto said she got the call from her agent while recording lines for an anime called Light Fade, and she's very happy to stay in Japan. This makes the Dragons' catcher situation a little more complicated though, because now they have 2 great catchers with Kota Suzuki already on the team. We'll have to see how the 2 mesh this season and how the Dragon team utilizes them both. To sign Muto, the Dragons had to release their 31-year-old backup catcher Anzai Yo, who was making $5.8 million. Other moves for this Dragons team include signing starting pitcher and relief pitcher 24-year-old Shizuko Koyanagi for $14.8 million and releasing 28-year-old relief pitcher Misaki Ito, who was making $3.6 million. They also add another fresh face, 19-year-old starting pitcher Orochi Arakawa for $10.6 million, while releasing their 36-year-old starting pitcher Azami Fuyu in the process. Jacob Fair, who's played for the Justice and BATTLEHAWKS, now goes over to Japan and joins the Dragons for $12.6 million, and they let go of 21-year-old first baseman Rin Fukushima, who was getting $6.8 million from the Dragons. The final free agent signing for the Dragons was another starting pitcher, 22-year-old Yori Igarashi for $5.6 million. She replaces starting pitcher 28-year-old Chiaki Tagawa, who was making $2.6 million. The Dragons loaded up on young pitching and now have an average pitching staff age of 23.6 years old. We'll see how these additions plus the big signing of Chisei Muto affects this team this season. Let's take a look at America's team now, the Justice, and they weren't too busy this offseason with only 2 moves, both being sign and releases, but they allowed the team to get better in key areas. First, they signed a 23-year-old rookie, left fielder Eddie Martin for $15.1 million, and he takes the place of left fielder 27-year-old Glenn Fisher, who was being paid $3.5 million. The second sign and release for the Justice was picking up former Monarch reliever, the 26-year-old lefty Octavia Blakesley for $7.2 million, while releasing relief pitcher 31-year-old Trevor Dawson, who was making $2.7 million. Blakesley last year for the Monarchs racked up 2 wins, a 2.97 ERA with a whip of .92 and 20 strikeouts to 8 walks. The Justice are hoping these few additions will allow them to improve on their 10-14 6th place finish last season. Moving on to the Mighty and their offseason moves. Now the big question was Will Gabriela Gonzalez return to the team? The answer is yes. The 19-year-old returns on a new deal for $33.9 million. Gonzalez finished last season with a 3.6 ERA, whip of 1.17, and she put up 34 strikeouts for just 14 walks. The only other move by the Mighty was a re-signing of relief pitcher 28-year-old Andres Santana for $2.6 million. It's time to talk about the Kings and Queens of the Diamond as we focus on the Monarchs, who finished last season in 3rd place at 13-11, making the playoffs but got bounced in the first round by the Battlehawks. They had a pretty busy time making moves, starting with the biggest one, snagging former Tormenta shortstop 19-year-old Isabella Contreras for $11.5 million, and this is an interesting ad because Kwl Wellington is the current starter, and they're both top tier players at the position. They also add relief pitcher 33-year-old Eli O'Brien for $3.4 million, former Mighty starting pitcher 28-year-old Arsenio Barrett at $10.5 million. The only sign and release move they made was letting go of second baseman 33-year-old Barnaby Belleville III, who was making $6.6 million, and signing 21-year-old rookie second baseman Patricia Rolex for $8.5 million. These moves beef up the Monarch offense for sure. We shall see how they fare this season. The Monument Conference champion Nightmare weren't too busy this offseason, as most of their players returned, but Kwl Lightning does not. More on that later. Replacing Kiwi is going to be difficult, but the Nightmare signed the former Tiger third baseman, 27-year-old Wonjai Kim, to a $4.5 million contract, and they also add left fielder 27-year-old Betty Bombshell for $6.5 million. Bombshell played for the Swordfish last season, and the Nightmare are hoping this season they not only return to the AWL Championship, but win it all. Let's enter the desert and take a look at the Pythons in their offseason. They had a great year last season, finishing in first place in the Valiant at 14-10, but ended up getting eliminated in the first round as the 1 seed by the Widows. They make 2 huge sign and release moves, first picking up the former Siren right fielder 24-year-old Emi Shiba for $13.6 million, and release second baseman 28-year-old Homer Bridges, who was making $5.3 million. The Widows were in contract talks with Shiba, but the two sides were unable to come to terms. Word is they were playing the waiting game on Shiba, but clearly they waited too long. The final move the Pythons made was signing the former Blurs relief pitcher 28-year-old Motormouth Moschita for $10.8 million, and they let go of relief pitcher 28-year-old Baron Jones, who was getting $3.7 million. Transitioning from first to worst, let's see what the Reapers did to improve on their last place 6-18 finish last season. The team is going to unveil new uniforms this season, so the fan base is sure to be excited about that. That excitement is only going to ramp up because their first move was a sign and release. They grabbed the former Battlehawks switch hitting second baseman 23-year-old Kai Zitkala for $12.2 million and released catcher Alfonso Thorne. Continuing the upgrades, they signed former Monarch right fielder 19-year-old Roman Claymore to a $9.6 million deal, and Claymore is going to get a chance to start for sure, as I imagine the 28-year-old Sharon Shadow will move to start in left field this season. The Reapers also add a rookie and 20-year-old left fielder Onyx Harvey for $7.3 million. They let go of left fielder 27-year-old Russell Wolf to make this move happen. They then add some veteran depth by signing 34-year-old center fielder Zane Hawk for $5.6 million and let second baseman Jack Hades go. The final acquisition was signing former Blurs backup catcher and right fielder 37-year-old Diana Fleta for $6.9 million and release the catcher 34-year-old Slade Rossi. With these moves, the Reapers could be better than 6 wins this upcoming season. We're going to go back out to Japan now for a look at the Sirens. They made the playoffs last season, finishing 14-10 in 3rd place after being rebuilt from the ground up, so they're looking to continue the upward trend. They needed a new closer after Ron Suji's retirement, so they go out and get the old Tormenta closer, 26-year-old Marisol de Jesus, signing her to a $7.4 million deal. They also add their first 2 male players in team history with the additions of the former Battlehawk, 22-year-old Khalil Archer for $10 million, and the veteran catcher who used to play for the Justice but was released midway through the season, Paul Johnson, as he agrees to a $6.8 million deal. Not the flashiest of moves, but we'll see how the Sirens fare this upcoming season. 2 more teams to go in our off-season recap. Let's go take a swim with the Swordfish. They were the 1 seed in last year's playoffs, but got upset by the 4-seeded Tigers in the first round. They're definitely looking to do better this time around. The Swordfish make one huge splash, bringing in nightmare third baseman Kwl Lightning for $21.5 million. The move came at the cost of replacing 32-year-old center fielder Azriel Campbell, who was not happy with his $18.6 million deal. He made his frustrations known on Twitter, and that's what led to this transaction. The Tigers retain everyone as no one leaves the team in free agency, so we move on to our final team, the Tormenta. First, they bring back the 37-year-old center fielder Luna Ordonez for $6.3 million. Then, they go and sign their first ever male player and center fielder Azriel Campbell, who wasn't happy with his money situation on the Swordfish, but because of that, he was waiting around for an offer before finally accepting the $13 million one from the Tormenta. The Tormenta wrapped up their offseason with a couple of sign and release moves, one being bringing in the backup to Carla Pontarelli of the Widows, catcher Kanye Jin. The 23-year-old will make $7.9 million. She's replacing right fielder 31-year-old Antonella Soto. It's reported that she's been a problem for the coaching staff, getting into shouting matches with them, so they released her. Finally, they signed second baseman 31-year-old Sarita Busto for $5.7 million. She replaces first baseman 29-year-old Ava Sofia Navarro. And that does it for the off-season recap. A new season is upon us, and the Widows will begin theirs on the road, facing Morgan Vincenzo and the new look Reapers at the Swagger Center. What was your favorite move of the off-season for the Widows or the other teams in the league? Leave those thoughts down below in the comments, and don't forget to also leave a like and subscribe if you're new here. And I apologize for not getting some of the players in that the community had requested. There weren't as many I guess big moves with newer, younger players coming in. I kind of want to save the community players for younger players, and so they're around longer in the league. That's why I only added, I think there's one in there. Rolex was the one that made it in. Anyway, you guys, that's gonna do it for me for the video. I will see you all in the next one. You know what to do. Keep on shining and keep on grinding. I will see you all in the next one.